Hello and welcome to Other Voices, brought to you by Peninsula Peace and Justice Center. I'm your host, Paul George. On this month's edition of Other Voices, we're going to try to answer the question, what does it take to take on large corporations like oil companies and big banks and win? To help us answer that question, I am pleased to welcome Gayle McLaughlin, former two-term mayor of Richmond, California, and a recent candidate for California's lieutenant governor. She is also a co-founder of the Richmond Progressive Alliance and is in the process of helping to form a new statewide California Progressive Alliance. Gayle, welcome to Other Voices.
Thank you, Paul. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Are you recovered from your run for lieutenant governor?
Yes, and right on to the California Progressive Alliance work.
How was that experience running for?
It was
From city politics to statewide.
It was quite interesting because we really were essentially an organizing campaign. Of course, we would have loved to have won, and then we could have kept the organizing work going and utilized the lieutenant governor's seat as a tool to work around and organize around. But we always knew that that was the essence of our campaign, to bring people together and to encourage people to build local progressive alliances, of which we did to a great extent. 15 new local progressive alliances have emerged.
As a result of the campaign?
As a result of the campaign. And we were doing some of this work before the campaign and subsequently. So people, really resonated with some of the work we did in Richmond and wanted to form a local progressive alliance similar to the RPA.
Interesting. Well, we'll talk about that more when we talk about the California Progressive Alliance. But I want to start out because the story of what the Richmond Progressive Alliance did in Richmond, I think should be an inspiration for anybody who does organizing or is an activist at any level, because it's a pretty amazing story. So let's roll the clock back and talk about that.
Sure.
And first of all, kind of describe what the political and life situation was in Richmond that kind of provided the impetus for putting together this Progressive Alliance.
Yeah. Well, we formed the Richmond Progressive Alliance. I was a co-founder in 2003. And prior to 2003, the entire city council was dominated by Chevron, the big oil company, oil refinery in our city. And, just for people who aren't familiar with Richmond, Chevron is the biggest employer there by far. Yes,
correct?
it's the biggest employer, but not of Richmond residents. Only 5% of their employee force lives in Richmond. So 5 to 10%. We have never been able to get the exact figure from them, but that's about where it is. And so there isn't a lot of Richmond residents getting employed at the refinery, but nevertheless, they have a lot of employees. Yeah.
And they dominate.
And they dominated the city council. They funded city council members' campaigns, and they gave them all kinds of advice. I mean, the whole city was run based on, the corporate model. I mean, Chevron used to give advice to the city manager. They had a desk outside the city manager's office, believe it or not. In the 1990s, a Chevron representative had a desk there, and there were workshops on how to run City Hall given by Chevron representatives. That's how dominating they were. And like I said, all the city council members either were intimidated by Chevron or were fully funded with their campaigns.
Where does the city government intersect with the Chevron refineries there that would have them so concerned? I mean,
well, Chevron
because most of the regulation is at the federal or state level.
Yeah, well, when Chevron wants a new project or to upgrade the refinery, and sometimes they have come forward with proposals to expand the refinery, they have to get the city, get a city permit. So we have that leverage, it's.
And I guess one thing we should keep in mind is that they did take over the Richmond City Council, but they're also trying to do this sort of thing at the county and state level.
Absolutely. We know that
so
these
Richmond
big oil
is a little
companies,
microcosm of how the oil companies work.
Right, but they were really clear on wanting to stay in control of Richmond and of City Hall, and we just had gotten tired of it, the activists in Richmond, and we had seen how the people's needs were not being addressed. And we were activists, we'd speak before the City Council saying, you know, our piece and urging the council to do this or that, and they would ignore us. They would listen, but then vote a different way. So we decided it was time we would become the leaders we were waiting for. And so that's when we came together. We were from different party affiliations or no party affiliation, but we decided to put party aside, just come together based on our progressive values and run candidates who vowed to take no corporate money, which was something totally unheard of in Richmond prior to the Richmond Progressive Alliance, and also to build a local movement, an inclusive, diverse, year in, year out movement that addressed the issues of the city, the people's interests. And so that's when we came together in the end of 2003. And I was a candidate for city council in 2004, along with one other RPA member. And he didn't quite make it because the police union attacked him. But I managed to win. And so I was the first RPA council member elected in 2004, and then 2 years later I ran for mayor and was elected as mayor and served 2 terms. And actually, after I termed out, I ran again for council and served a few more years.
All right. And mayor in Richmond is by popular vote. Not
right.
A lot of cities around here, the city council, it's kind of an honorary position.
Right.
But, you know, but you ran for mayor. And
right. This is an elected mayor. So there's 7 members of the city council, 6 council members are elected, and an elected mayor who can serve 2 terms. There's no terms for city council, term limits for city council members.
So the formation of the Richmond Progressive Alliance, was this mostly individual activists or various organizations that hadn't worked before together, or maybe worked together on a specific project now coming together? What was the makeup?
Yeah. We were
organizational representation?
Individuals working on different issues. Some were working on pushing back on Chevron for its pollution or wanting, you know, fair taxation from them. Others were working against police brutality, of which we had problems at that time. Others were working on addressing the homeless issue. And we decided to just, and of course we were all working with other organizations as well. But as individuals, we came together and formed the RPA. But then later in 2004, I think it was August of 2004, we held what we called a People's Convention. And we invited all different groups, and different groups co-sponsored that People's Convention with us, like SEIU, the City Employees Union, and ACORN, which now is ACE, the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, and other groups. So we've always formed alliances or coalition work with other groups that are, you know, doing great work and share our values.
Right. And I guess that was on like a case-by-case basis, and you came together as a permanent political bloc.
That's
in
right. Yeah. We were definitely focused on from the beginning on how not did we just want 1 or 2 seats. We really wanted to have a majority of seats. We wanted the representatives of Richmond to really represent the
Richmond.
community, right? And we're a working class community, largely people of color, and we really made sure we kept vetting and putting forward candidates that were representative of the community. And as of 2016, we had 5 RPA members sitting on seats in the city council out of 7. So that was a super majority.
Yeah.
And people, they were, you know, almost all people, I think it was 4 out of the 5. I think I was the only one who was not a person of color out of the RPA members. But of course, as a woman, I was, of course, vetted by the RPA. We always wanted to represent those communities that, you know, were dealing with oppression, whether it was women's oppression or people of color oppression, you know, or disabled members. We haven't had a disabled member yet on the city
On the
council
city
from the
council.
RPA, but we have had a lesbian member of our community win a city council's race. So, so we really, diversity is big for us.
Okay. And how do you get behind a candidate? Do you just look at people who have announced that they're running and decide to endorse them, or did the RPA kind of have its own candidate selection process? That's not clear to me.
Well, we have like a nomination committee that we actually outreach to candidates or to people that we think would make good candidates. And for us, what makes a good candidate doesn't have to be somebody who's an expert in government policy. You know, you learn as you go, but it needs to be somebody who has the right values, has really good, strong, progressive values, and a commitment to work not only on the city council issues like with other elected officials, but mainly with the community. We made that clear that our candidates have to be organizers as well as city officials, because it takes a movement to really make change. No one elected official or even a whole body of progressive elected officials is not sufficient to really address the democratic needs of a community. You have to have the community involved.
That's right. That's right. So you took on some epic struggles, as I said at the beginning, with some large corporations. There was, you went toe-to-toe with Chevron that you've been talking about, with the banks. One of the earliest cities to raise the minimum wage around here. One of the earliest rent control things. These are all really exciting. You pick one of these and tell us what happened and how it.
Sure. Yeah. So let me just quickly touch on all of them if I could. So Chevron was always a big fight for us because, they really, once they realized we were making progress and we got one person on the city council and then a few years later another, and they were starting to fear us. And so one of our big gains was to beat Chevron on the electoral field. And just to give you an example of how much they spend in a city, the size, a city that has 110,000 people. It's not that big, but they spent $3 million in 2014 to try and defeat me and two other progressives.
On a city council race?
On a city council race.
And how much did you raise?
Gosh, I think it was like between, I think 40,000, something like that, and so we were well outspent, but we all won. All of the progressives won and all of the Chevron funded candidates lost in 2014. So we showed you can beat that big money. But other things we did with Chevron was...
did you campaign differently or just the usual shoe leather, door-to-door?
Yeah, it's door-to-door, knocking on doors and really sharing with people our values and letting them know we take no corporate money. That's really important because it's a winning issue. Because
and that is central to the Richmond Progressive Alliance and what you're proposing with the no corporate money.
Yes, in the RPA and also in the California Progressive Alliance, we'll only endorse candidates who take no corporate money. So we start early. I don't know if I fully answered your last question about how we get candidates. We reach out to them and we encourage people who might not have thought to run, but have good values to please run and consider it. You'll get the support from the community and the RPA, and we're all in this together.
You'll just have Chevron down on your head.
You'll have Chevron to tackle, but you can do it, And so, so fighting Chevron was a big battle, and we also limited their pollution, and we got over $100 million in additional taxes from them.
Wow.
So that was with community pressure and having a couple of us on the council at that time really fighting the good fight and pressuring the other council members. And it was a pressuring action that worked. And they finally caved in, the other council members. And we got a settlement of $114 million in additional taxes from Chevron.
Wow.
So that was a big step. Yeah.
I want to get a little more detail on that. First, you said you limited their pollution. Obviously, a major issue there. There have been accidents at the plant which have threatened, seriously threatened the health of residents. What was City Council able to do in terms of the
limit to the pollution?
Yeah.
Well, they had first of all, they brought forward an expansion project in 2008, which we fought with many groups, Communities for a Better Environment, Asian Pacific Environmental Network, many other groups coming together saying, no, you're not going to, they wanted to refine heavier, dirtier crude. And we said, no, that's not acceptable. We want the health of our community to come first. And so we fought that and we won that. Actually, the majority of the council passed the expansion project, but then the environmental groups sued the city and Chevron and won. And so those of us who voted against the project, like myself, were, vindicated in our vote. And then Chevron had to go back to the drawing board and come up with a better project, one that wasn't going to refine this dirtier crude. And so that project came forward in 2014, and we made sure there was a limit in their pollution to that new project. We made sure they had to limit their pollution. We need more work to get the pollution to go down further and further, but we made some gains as a result of that new project, which wasn't an expansion project, but had some upgrades to it, and like I said, some limit to the pollution.
And this $100 million plus settlement, what's the story behind that?
So that story was I
love hearing stuff like that.
Yeah, this is actually a great story. It's in this book I wrote called Winning Richmond. It goes into detail about some of our struggles. And this issue of the taxation came about by us, the RPA, spearheading a ballot measure. It was Measure T. It would have been a tax on large manufacturers, the value of their raw materials that they used in the process. And it was really targeting Chevron, because 95% of the new tax money would have come from Chevron. And we worked very hard, knocking on doors, starting early as we do in all our campaigns, and educated the community, and the community passed the measures. Measure T, it was a winning ballot measure. Chevron immediately took us to court, and the court ruled in Chevron's favor due to some technical issue with the ballot measure. Even though we had lawyers vet the measure and everything, but we thought, oh my goodness, we lost this one, but we immediately started to put forward a new ballot measure. We were going to do a different type of a taxation measure. We actually were already campaigning for it. And Chevron came to the table, the long story short, Chevron came to the table and we worked out a negotiated settlement of $114 million over 15 years. So that we would drop the additional tax measure we were putting forward, and and we would just deal with this for now. And then, of course, later we could also put forward another measure. A citizen's ballot measure could happen at any time, but the city council could also put forward a ballot measure after the 15 years.
Yeah, that's interesting, because they won't sit down with groups like yours unless they know that you've got the clout.
Yeah, they knew we had the people on our side, and that's really what made the difference.
I just want to catch up on a couple more of these things, because it's been really creative, and like I said, I think it should be studied and inspiration by people. Show me your book again. Can we hold this up to the camera? Kent? Oh, okay, camera 2. This is Winning Richmond. This is fairly new, right?
Yeah, last March.
Okay. And this is the story about the alliance.
The struggles, throughout the 12, 14 years of struggle. Yeah.
This should be a textbook for people. I really admire what you folks have done. You took on the banks and the foreclosure crisis after the big crash. Talk about that briefly.
Yeah, so Richmond was hit very hard, as many cities were, during the foreclosure crisis. We had over 50% of our mortgages underwater. And so people were really struggling.
That was stunning. Over half the people in the town
were suffering
underwater,
from
meaning they owed more on their mortgage than the house was
current
worth.
value of the home. Yeah, and so what we did was champion a program which it was called Richmond Cares, Community Action for Equity and stability or something like that. But the name that it kind of went by, well, informally, was the eminent domain program. And what this program was all about was that we, the city, were seeking to acquire underwater mortgages from the big banks, and we were writing them letters telling them, sell us, or actually telling them to reduce the principal on the mortgages so these homeowners, can have their home value in line with their mortgages.
Yeah.
And if you can't do it, big banks, if you can't or are unwilling or are unwilling to, then we will use our city power of eminent domain to acquire these underwater mortgages, and we, the city, will reduce the principal for our homeowners, all the while keeping them in their home and then giving them a new reduced principal mortgage. And so that was a really good program that got us a lot of attention nationwide. Wall Street was up in arms, as you can imagine, and they went to other cities who were actually thinking about doing it and scared the city council members, and they scared some of our city council members, and eventually Wall Street.
Did other city council members contact you to find out?
What we were trying to get, like a joint powers authority of a few cities to come together to do this, and other cities were trying, some of their council members. But the best they could do was pass a resolution in support of Richmond doing it. And we said, no, we want you to do it too. But what they eventually did, what Wall Street did, was go to Congress. And Congress, this is an example why we can't have corporate controlled office holders on any level of government, because many of our Congress people are funded by Wall Street banks and such. And so what they did was they got Congress to pass a bill that said any entity, any public entity, any city council or any other public entity who acquires a mortgage by eminent domain cannot get government insurance. And mortgages need to be insured, and we were going to use, government insurance. And so that kind of forced us to set the program aside. However, we had put so much pressure on Wall Street that some of the banks did voluntarily reduce the principals for some of our homeowners. So we considered that it was a partial success. But we've got to keep pushing back on Wall Street and big corporations. Because, they're, they shouldn't be running the show.
Yeah, that's an excellent example of the effectiveness of this kind of alliance organizing of all the progressive forces in an area. When you can take something from Richmond City Council and end up getting the attention of Congress, and they actually pass something to respond.
Yes, that's how it works. I mean, I guess they were pretty scared.
Yeah. And finally, and then I want to talk about the new effort, but you also took on rent control.
Yes, so we passed...
which is something that everybody struggling with down here.
Yeah, we know the rents are just skyrocketing all over. And so it was in 2016 that we passed a ballot measure to have rent control in Richmond. We had actually supported, the RPA had supported it for years, but we never had the votes. We finally did have the votes on the city council to pass it, but then the California Apartment Association did a referendum and lied about where we were at in Richmond, saying that we already have rent control and it's not good rent control, but they had a better idea. And so they got enough signatures through these lies, and we were forced to, and it shows the ups and downs you have in these local struggles, we were forced to rescind the rent control ordinance, but we immediately, you can't give up, started gathering signatures to put it on the ballot. And we did. And we did that by forming a coalition. So it was not only the RPA, but we had about 20 other organizations join us. Everything from, disability rights groups to environmental groups to our urban gardening group. Everybody is affected
Everybody's
by
affected
rents.
by
Yeah.
housing, yes.
Yeah, so we came together and we worked out an ordinance to put on the ballot. We made some tweaks in the one that the city council had passed, and it passed overwhelmingly. And so we were actually one of the first cities in 30 years to pass a new rent control law. So I think Mountain View also
Mountain View
passed
did
at that time.
as
Yeah.
well. And just as a little aside on that, I went and testified at Mountain View City Council a couple of times on the rent control measure and spoke at rallies and stuff. But every time we were at City Council, the Apartment Owners Association was there.
Yes.
But on the flip side, when we had the minimum wage campaign, where we got it raised in 5 different cities, the apartment owners associations were also there in favor of the minimum wage increase because it could help them raise rents even more if people were making more money. It was really funny to see the same people at these different meetings.
Really interesting, yeah. Huh.
So let's move on to your new project, the California Progressive Alliance, where you, I guess, hope to replicate the success that you've had in Richmond statewide. Let's get the details out there, and maybe the website up on the screen for viewers. You're having a founding convention at the end of next month. We're
March
taping
30th
this early
31st.
February.
Right.
What are the dates again?
March 30th and 31st.
Okay, and San Luis.
In San Luis Obispo. Yeah,
Okay.
we made it central in the state. We thought that would be a good idea, so it wouldn't be too much of hardship for people at different ends of the state.
And it's a nice town as well.
Yeah.
And people can find out about this by visiting CaliforniaProgressiveAlliance.org.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And we encourage people to register and join us in San Luis Obispo. It's going to be a great coming together of progressives up and down the state.
So how are you doing outreach on this? You mentioned that during your lieutenant governor campaign, you used that to encourage other local progressive alliances. I think you said 15 have formed.
Yeah.
So is this statewide convention representatives of those groups, or is everyone welcome?
Well, so my lieutenant governor campaign really did reach out to many organizations. I gave presentations up and down the state to hundreds of groups. These included our revolution groups, our revolution being the group that Bernie Sanders launched. Also DSA groups, Democratic Socialists of America, Green Party chapters, Peace and Freedom Party engaged with me on this, on my campaign and supported my campaign, and so many other groups. Movement for a People's Party. I ran NPP, no party preference, and really wanted to bring people together through my campaign. And we did, I got over 100 endorsements of groups from different parties and groups that were, understanding that we needed to release the corporate grip on California. And so after the campaign, while we didn't make it past the primary, we had all this momentum going. We had so many groups fired up that were doing, and these local progressive alliances were doing great local work, as were the OR groups, the Our Revolution groups, DSA, Green Party, all the other, Peace and Freedom. It was something that just needed to keep that momentum going and not have people work so much in silos. So that's when we decided to form the California Progressive Alliance. And what we are is an independent network of volunteers, volunteer individuals, and we're organizations that really are united by a shared belief that a better California is possible by releasing the grip of corporate interests that has overshadowed the voice of the people.
Yeah.
And so, we have 4 tenets. We have, first of all, want to uplift progressive ideas. We also want to support local progressive alliances. We want to endorse corporate-free candidates for state offices, and we want to do lobbying, legislative lobbying, support and oppose bills as they come forward, and write new model legislation. So a lot of this work has already started, but we'll be really kind of ratifying our program, our platform, and our ideas at the convention in San Luis Obispo.
So how do you see this working, physically working? A statewide organization, are you going to have to have a lot of frequent meetings or Skype conferences or something? What's going to be the outside of your founding convention?
Right.
What's the decision-making process? Who makes the decisions? How do you pick the issues? Things like that.
Right. Well, we're currently operating with an interim steering committee, and we have weekly meetings by way of Zoom, online videos. Some people call in, but we have people in Southern California, people in Northern California. So we envision, once we get our 2019 steering committee, because right now, we want to make sure we have the democratic process working, so we'll have an election at the convention. But we expect these online meetings to continue with the new formalized steering committee. And we have action teams that we're setting up. Like we have a legislative action team, and that action team will be working with various districts throughout California and encouraging people to write letters and visit their legislators and address the issues that are on our platform or that come up, like this whole PG&E bailout issue has come up, and the legislative action team is already working on saying, don't bail out PG&E. There's alternatives. The taxpayer shouldn't pay for their mismanaged and unkept up lines. Instead, we could have community choice energy programs, and we could have municipal or a statewide owned public utility. So we want to really put out the alternatives there and have people in various districts throughout the state working on them.
This action team structure, you did that at the Richmond Progressive Alliance too, right?
We actually did, that came from the RPA. We utilized some of the formalized entities that the RPA uses, and so have some of the other progressive alliances. I know there's a South Bay Progressive Alliance in the right in this area, and they have action teams as well. So we think it's a good way to kind of break up into subcommittees and work on specific aspects of the organization.
It sounds like you're taking your Richmond model and basically just transferring it to a state level, and you've learned what works and what doesn't. So.
Right. I think the RPA model has been used and will continue to be used by the CPA when it's appropriate. As a statewide organization, of course, we might have different modifications, and every progressive alliance, of course, will have their own version of their progressive alliance, because every city has their own issues, and you have to decide what works best. Sometimes a different structure might work better for different cities or regions, but overall, I think most people have found the RPA model to be very helpful.
So how will this California Progressive Alliance relate to, or vice versa, how will local organizations, say like Peninsula Peace and Justice Center, relate to the Alliance?
Well, we are an individual membership organization. However, the way we have decided to address organizations as allies is to have an ally organization application that we're going to be sending out, and we'd love to send it to the Peninsula Peace and Justice sector and center, and get you to sign on to be an ally organization. We make it clear that organizations have their own bylaws, and the CPA has its own bylaws that will be ratified in March. And sometimes organizations have their own process for endorsing candidates, so we don't expect there to be. You don't necessarily have to have the same endorsements as the CPA, or you might be a 501c3.
Which we are.
Okay.
That was going to be my next
Okay,
question, because we
right.
cannot endorse
And 501c3s
candidates.
can't endorse
Right.
candidates. So we have something in our bylaws that says we understand that about 501c3s. We don't have that expectation that you will participate in the endorsement process, but we still believe we have so much in common, and we would love for you to sign on as an ally organization.
Okay, send me an application.
All right, will do.
All right, let's get the audience in on this. I'm sure you have some questions and/or comments. Unlike most places where we say, now make it a question, you're actually allowed to express an opinion at this program. Just don't be too long-winded about it. So if you wait for me to come with the microphone, I will be there, and if you'll stand up to make it easier on our camera people. And then I also want to mention we are, for the first time, and I'm hoping that this is the case, live streaming to YouTube. So we might have some questions coming in from YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube at home, you'll see a little chat window to the right of the video screen, and just type in a question there. And if you're from out of town, let us know where you're writing in from, and we'll try to get your question on the air. So I'm going to say pardon me and go do some questions. You had a question here, Ken.
Hi, my name is Ken. Gayle, the RPA has been around for some time, and I've long been intrigued by why its success has not been duplicated in other Bay Area cities, including those with progressive communities like Oakland or Berkeley. Could it be because they do not have a big bad wolf to organize against? Or could it be the size of the communities or some other factors?
Yeah, good question.
Good question. Yes, you know, we worked very hard and really centered our work on Richmond for many years. Other cities tried to get similar progressive alliances off the ground, didn't have initial success. Now there's starting to be more success. But I would say, like, from around 2014 onward, we started to go around to other cities and share the Richmond story. So prior to that, we were really focused on getting the work done in Richmond only. We did our outreach after 2014. People wanted to know about us so that they could replicate it, as you're saying. Yes, every city doesn't have a big bad Chevron, but they do have their problems. So, you know, there's a big developer that might want to, you know, disregard environmental issues, or there's other big corporations that aren't paying their fair share of taxes. So we think that this can be replicated by other cities, regardless of whether they have a giant corporation in their city or not. There's certainly problems that activists circulate their energies on. And it's just a question of coming together and forming this alliance, and then holding the forums and running those candidates without corporate money for office. And I think that's the uniqueness about the RPA model, because you build a movement and you have people on the city council who are part of the movement, which is kind of unique. You know, people support candidates, but then after they get elected, if they get elected, the movement dissipates. Well, we kept the movement going. So we are encouraging other cities now over the last few years. Not to say other cities haven't done good work all along, but we think we were onto something and want to share it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. I'll go all the way back here, and then I'll come back up this way.
Hi, my name's Roberta Alquist, and I'm with the Mid-Peninsula branch of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. We've been addressing, we have a low-income housing committee, and this is kind of a three-pronged question. Palo Alto has been very resistant to rent control, to rent stabilization, to stopping the office development. I mean, it's been a nightmare, and this has been like for 40 years. Finally, we have some limit on office development, but people are opposed. The local city government, for the most part, is opposed to CASA. So I'd like to know what your thoughts are about this compact, which basically Wiener is pushing statewide because local communities like Palo Alto refuse to build low-income housing or have any kind of rent stabilization projects.
Right.
So we support that, at least a part of CASA, which is a compact advocating housing, below market housing around transit centers and more housing before office development. I'd like to know what the population of Richmond is in terms of renters versus homeowners, because Palo Alto's nearly half renters, and what your thoughts about CASA might be in relation to the housing crisis. And
Right.
this also relates to climate change, to climate crisis. I mean, if you make the poorest people have to travel the furthest and pay the most for their child care and whatever else, take the longest time, create the longest lines on the freeway, it seems really so unfair.
Right, right.
Thank you.
Yes, so let me see if I can cover the basics of that question. So the issue of, the question was basically, how do I feel about the whole issue of building around transit? And there was a second part to, oh, yes, yes, yeah. And yeah, right, right. So Richmond, I remember now, Richmond population is 110,000, 50% of that, of our population rents. So like Palo Alto, we have 50% renters. So getting to the point of being able to have more and more housing around public transit is really a good thing. So we in Richmond have supported around Richmond BART, supported housing, low-income housing around Richmond BART, and other affordable housing projects in the inner city. And I think what we need is to not take local control away. If I remember correctly, Weiner's bill was put out about a year ago, and there was something where it took away some of the local control. And I realized that that sometimes there's a lot of people resisting, and that's probably what it came from.
Yeah, it took away local control,
yeah,
the zoning
yeah,
around
yes.
Transit hubs.
Right, and it was not only transit like hubs like BART, but it was like, various major streets and cities
Right, where
where
there'd
were
be
very
a lot of
close to
buses, yeah.
residents and such, yeah. And so there was objection on that level. Right. So I think, some modification, like I said, Richmond was already doing the right thing, building around transit. But I've heard mixed opinions on that bill, which was a little too broad at the time. I don't know if there's another bill right now. But something that doesn't make it seem like every corner of a city could have to have high density housing, but rather certain areas of a city perhaps could have some incentives or some requirements to do so, because I definitely think it ties in with climate change. It ties in with the fact that people really need to spend more of their time, with their families than in the commute and causing greenhouse gas emissions and such. So I'm definitely on the same plane with you on some version of that.
What are incentives for
Roberta, nobody's going to hear you on the TV if you don't have this. So the one-on-one dialogue does not work. Let me ask, do we have a YouTube question here?
No, there's 4 people watching, but they're not asking questions.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Then Steve had his hand up first. I just wanted to mention, she mentioned that 50% of the residents in Palo Alto are renters. It was about that in Richmond, right? The way housing is going, we're going to have 90% renters around here
That's
before.
right. Yeah, the way that prices are, yes.
And if you would stand up.
Hi, Steve Rock.
Hi.
To run for office requires not only money for the campaign, but money for your rent and money for food. for the people running. Now, very often it's only relatively wealthy people who run for office who can afford to take the time off from work to devote themselves full-time to campaigning. I don't know your income status or where you are, but it sounded like you wanted to be inclusive of all of Richmond's population, which includes people who don't have all that wealth, so they can just leave their jobs and campaign and go door to door every day. So how do you get candidates who are relatively, or work full-time at not so lucrative jobs in office? And I don't, you can use yourself as an example if you want to, but I don't want to intrude on you personally.
Yeah, sure. No, I live, my husband and I live pretty low income, and we have for a while. During my initial campaign, I was working part-time, and then I think I dropped that to campaign more full-time. And we were able to just scrape by. And then once I was elected, I did not work besides my city council job, which was a very, very low salary, as was the mayoral salary was very low. It was always like a part-time salary for a full-time plus job. I chose my husband worked part-time, but it really required the support of my husband to do this job because he's an activist and very helpful in all the work I do. It takes a lot of energy to not only run the campaign, but then to serve as a council member, organizer, because that's how I saw myself. And it was something I've chosen to do, to live at a lower income level and not have as many luxuries as I may want or may have if I kept a full-time job. Other candidates, though, have kept their full-time job while they ran for office, campaigning after work on weekends. And then when they were elected, they've also kept their... It would be hard to keep your job while being mayor of a city like Richmond. But being a council member, it's doable. You could keep your full-time job and work as a council member, just making sure you have time off for various city council meetings and to meet with constituents and such. So some of our council members, our RPA council members, served while working full-time.
Why don't you give us a thumbnail of some of these other
council members?
Members from the RPA. It's an interesting question.
It is,
how
and
you
it's
approach
a very important question because too many people are held back from running for office because they know they have the work of to support their family and such, and that shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't just be wealthy people that are allowed to run for office or that
Although
can
it does
run
seem
for
to be
office.
a trend these days.
It really does, yeah. Well, we have right now we have a young man who is a city council member. He's also an organizer with ACE. The Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment. So he stayed...
So an activist like you.
Right, exactly. So he has an activist job that he gets paid for, and he has a city council job that he gets a small salary for. But throughout his campaign and throughout his work as a council member, he's kept that job going. We have another council member who was on the council, and she was a youth specialist working for the county. That's her full-time job during the day, but she was a council member during the evenings, and whenever she could get time off, she would meet with constituents. So it's a question of some of us. I mean, I've been an activist since my whole adult life, and that always has been the driving force for me, even while I held various jobs with nonprofits, or I taught for a while and tutored. But I always knew my activism was what was driving me. So for me, taking on this role as an elected official, I wanted to throw myself into it, and I was willing to live it, a little more sparse way, I guess. So it is a decision, but I do think that it's unfortunate that the salaries aren't sufficient enough for more people to run.
Seems like the city council needs to give itself a raise. All right, let's go back to our audience here. I think right here in front.
Yeah, hi, Gail. My name is Bob. First of all, thank you for all your great work all these years. I'm looking forward to attending the conference in March, and hopefully lots of other viewers will come.
Keep the mic closed.
Okay, so I have two questions. One is, you mentioned how you kept the movement going. So how do you complement your direct action work with your electoral work? So I'll ask my second question, sit down. My second question is, RPA is the city level, and now CPA is going to be at the state level. And it seems like there's a lot of different problems. I mean, one is that 100,000 doors to knock is something doable.
Yeah.
And so the shoe leather campaign is more effective. And the second is that city level is usually nonpartisan. State level is usually partisan. And when we have the whole two-party duopoly to fight against, and so
Right.
how will CPA deal with these differences?
Okay, could you repeat the first question again? Maybe give me
The
a
first
little more
question was, you
understanding?
mentioned how you kept the movement going at RPA.
In RPA, okay.
And so my question is, how do you take direct action work and complement that with the electoral work?
Like building like rallies and organizing among the community, and then couple that with electoral work. Well, that is the beauty, I think, of the RPA model. We understand that people need to be out in the streets, and we think that's true statewide as well. People need to have those marches, those rallies, those forums, those press conferences, and we need elected officials who have the same values as us and who run corporate free and who see themselves as organizers as well as elected officials to work shoulder to shoulder with the movement. So how do we couple the movement building and the electoral work is by actually seeing it as more of a unified entity. You know, I don't see elected officials as above the movement. I see it as a lateral thing. You know, we want elected officials, yes, they have separate duties to perform as elected officials, but their main duty is to build the movement, to use their city council seat or their assembly seat to build the movement, because it's the strength of all of us that'll build the political muscle and create the political power that we need to really not be ignored. You know, so that we're not ignored by the legislature and the governor. And we have to have that strength. And in cities, you know, building your local movement with those elected officials will pressure the other elected officials to do the right thing. So that's how we kind of combined that. And we thought election years are good years for organizing and building the movement because people are tuned in. So knocking on those doors and being at community events, passing out flyers, and you know, being there for the community and saying, hey, we're there for the people, not the corporations. And people get that, and it really, really resonates with them. Now, in your second question,
I was just going to say, we seem to have a new generation of people in Congress who share this whole
Yes.
nature of activism and representative.
absolutely, like AOC, yeah,
AOC
being a
and-
perfect example. Yeah, that's what we need.
That's what you're talking
That's
about.
exactly what I'm talking about. Now, on the issue of local versus statewide, so there are differences. You know, you can knock on every door in a local race, or even an assembly district. You can knock it for a statewide campaign like lieutenant governor or governor. You just can't knock on every door. But it's clear that that we need to work on both levels. I mean, on a local level, it's really important because you need to connect with your neighbors, your friends, your co-workers, build that solidarity for the movement, for the greater movement. On a statewide level, there are some issues that can't be solved on a local level, you know, like Medicare for all, free college, you know, reforming Prop 13, closing that corporate loophole. You know, these are issues that you need statewide attention for. So we need statewide work, but it's a little different, of course. Some solutions to overcoming some of the limitations of getting the word out statewide would be ranked choice voting. You know, so because people, you know, might not, sometimes people aren't aware of, like I ran as a no party preference candidate and people maybe automatically voted for a Democrat, but as people got to know me, they liked what I had to say, and maybe people who were hesitant to vote for me because they didn't think I would win because I wasn't a major party candidate would have voted for me if they knew, hey, I'll put Gayle as my first choice, I'll put one of the Democrats as a second choice, because if Gayle doesn't get enough votes, she'll be, be discounted or disqualified on the ballot, and then my number 2 choice will count. So that's a way to sort of overcome some of the limitations at this point in time when we have these 2 big parties that we know are corporate controlled, even though we know there are good progressive Democrats working within the Democratic Party and fighting a good fight. So yeah, there's challenges, but there's ways to overcome it. And of course, we want people in all these different organizations throughout the state to spread the word about good state candidates that hopefully will be coming forward in 2020.
We only have a couple of minutes left. Do we have a YouTube question?
Yes, Veronica Palmer has written in to say that she would like to hear something about the Modern Money Theory group that is participating in the Progressive Alliance Convention, and asks whether or not Gayle is aware of this particular financial
The
reform.
modern money.
Modern Money Theory.
I'll be honest, I don't know that much about it. I am aware that there is a group, and I'm glad if they're coming to the convention, we'll learn more about it, but I'm not 100% on board with or aware of all the details of what it stands for. Yeah.
You can't know every group that,
No,
signs up for one of these. Like I said, we only have a couple of minutes left. But a quick question that came into my mind while you were answering Bob's question. What if someone in your endorsement process, will there ever be a CPA candidate on the ballot, or how will that appear?
Yeah. So yeah, we are not a party. We're a group of people from different parties, who have or no party. So we won't have like a CPA candidate on the ballot, but we will endorse candidates.
Okay.
If they're corporate free and they stand for our platform. And that's a very much a part of what we are. And I think to further add to what Bob asked, the local races are indeed nonpartisan. But state races in California, with our so-called open primary system, in many ways, there's flaws to this system.
Before we get lost in ours, we're almost out of time.
Okay.
Give me 30 seconds on why people should come to San Luis Obispo March 30th and 31st.
All right. Well, basically, we're in dire times. I think people know this. We have corporations dominating us. We have military domination and all kinds of concerns about what's happening in terms of foreign policy. And we have an opportunity to come together as progressives and not to work in silos, and to build that solidarity, a radical solidarity with one another that says we're not going to just take what the system gives us. We're going to buck the system, and we're going to do something about it as sisters and brothers in this struggle.
We're going to let it go there because I'm getting the signal we're out of time.
Perfect.
This has been Gayle McLaughlin and the California Progressive Alliance. Thanks for joining us here.
Thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thank you.